Shalom, I'm Rabbi Michael Panitz of Temple Israel of Norfolk, Virginia, and I'd like to speak with you this week on the subject of monuments. My thesis can be stated in one sentence. When a monument becomes an idol, tear it down. In the news, last night, protesters in Portsmouth, Virginia, destroyed much of the Confederate soldiers' monument in the heart of the city's downtown. In Richmond, Virginia, protesters dismantled the Jefferson Davis statue on Monument Avenue. In other localities, Confederate statues have been covered over with tarps. City councils across the Commonwealth are considering actions to remove the statues or otherwise disavow the message that most people believe those statues to convey, a message of respect for the historical champions of slavery and racism, and of disrespect for African Americans today as well as in yesteryear. This is a remarkable development. Over the past several decades, we have witnessed debate over removing these statues, but after each round of debate, the statues have remained in place. Periodically, after the death of an African American in police custody, the debate has grown more acrimonious. But as recently as 1 month ago, if we had asked ourselves the likelihood of these monuments being removed by today, few, if any of us, would have thought that a likely scenario. Obviously, the charged atmosphere of protest in the wake of the murder of George Floyd is responsible for the sudden change in the borders of the possible. It was telling that Portsmouth police were on scene, but took no action to stop the protesters from dismantling the statue. This is a harbinger. Big changes in the world in which we live cause us to think about our old religious texts in new ways. Until recently, I used to have a sense of discomfort when I would read the words of the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 12, that the Israelites were commanded to tear down the pillars erected by the Canaanites. The text reminded me of the Taliban dynamiting the historic statues of the Buddha in Afghanistan in March 2001. I thought that action reprehensible. My own ideals include different religious groups living in peace and respecting each other's sanctuaries. So the passage in Deuteronomy evoked no sympathy. It is in the Bible, so I would try to contextualize it as something that made sense in its own time, but it had little to say to me today. Recent events have helped me to see this differently. Deuteronomy is not fundamentalist Islam. Unlike the Taliban, whose Muslim fundamentalism leaves no room to tolerate the pagans, the Bible does not commit the Israelites to make war with paganism everywhere and always. It even says, Deuteronomy chapter 4, that God has allotted the sun and the moon as the objects of worship for pagans. So, theology of that sort isn't the problem. Rather, the Bible levies a specific charge against the Canaanites, that they sacrifice their own children to the gods. The particular idols criticized in Deuteronomy chapter 12 are the cult objects of a people who justify the murder of innocents. The Bible wants to make sure that the people Israel never incorporate those idols into its own pattern of worship. We can generalize this point to say that the problem is not the idols per se, but rather the ideals that they concretize. If the idols are simply ways of venerating the forces of nature, The biblical answer is that those who worship them are in error, but that's the end of it. When those who worship idols are committing murder in the name of their religion, that is the real problem. With this insight, we can return to the present day and analyze the action taken against the monumental statues of Confederate history and mythology. The defenders of the statues say that they want to keep our history from being forgotten. But that argument strikes me as disingenuous. These statues aren't only about remembering, they're about celebrating. We have a lot of history that we take pains to teach, but that we do not need to celebrate with monumental statues. Dred Scott, who lost the case in 1857 seeking freedom from slavery, deserves a monument. John Sanford, the slave owner who won the case, would not deserve one. George Washington deserves his statues, but Benedict Arnold would not. Abraham Lincoln deserves his monument. John Wilkes Booth would not. Against the special pleading of the apologists, the real reason for the statues of the Confederate soldiers, their generals Lee, Jackson, and Company, and their President Jefferson Davis, is not to remind the 21st century that we ought never to go there again. Those statues were put up in the early 20th century by white supremacists, seeking to undo the verdict of the military defeat of the Confederacy in the Civil War. It was of a piece with the myth-making that slavery was somehow a benign institution, as depicted in propaganda such as Gone with the Wind. These monuments we can see are functioning as idols. The idolatry is a particular warped view that says that God has blessed the white race and endowed it with natural supremacy. That idolatry is not harmless nature worship. It is like the Canaanite religion excoriated in the Bible because its ideals lead to the deaths of many, many innocent black men, women, and children. From the lynching victims of the KKK to the young Emmett Till and all the way to this month's martyr, George Floyd, the thousands and myriads of black victims of a racist America are proof positive that the ideology of white supremacy is idolatry. Now, at long last, these monuments are coming down. This will not guarantee an end to racism. At best, it will remove one set of idols. The tougher idols to remove are those lodged in the hearts of racists, and those who are fellow travelers of racists. People who don't see themselves as oppressors, but who enjoy the fruits of an oppressive system. What happened last night in Portsmouth and in Richmond is a beginning. It is a century and a half overdue. Let us make sure by our own steadfast commitment that it will not be just a fitful spasm of conscience, but rather, in the words of Abraham Lincoln, a true new birth of freedom.